This is our first look at the 2024 rookie class. We're going to be going with possibly the best position to look at here for this class in particular, which will be wide receiver. Now, keep in mind, we're recording this before the Senior Bowl, before the Combine, before Pro Days, obviously well before the NFL Draft. So a lot is going to change. I just want to give an overall brief outlook from all these rookies, where we expect them to go in the 2024 NFL Draft, and how you should be valuing your 2024 rookie picks. Starting off tier 1, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be by himself. Now, obviously, this is not a unique take. Everybody and their mom is going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. here. He is a consensus top 5 NFL draft pick. If you look at NFL mock draft database currently, they have him going as the 2nd overall player off the board. I mean, we know that historically speaking, wide receivers typically aren't going number 1 overall. They're not going number 2 overall. Even the best of the best prospects don't. Jamar Chase went 5, and a lot of people thought he should have gone lower. But with Marvin Harrison Jr., this is a special player, and we have not seen a prospect profile of this caliber in quite some time. You go back and look at every single season he's played, he has excelled. The only year you can make an argument that he hasn't was 2021. And that season, he played alongside JSN, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Ibuka, a wide receiver we'll talk about later on. But he played alongside 4 wide receivers that were going to go round 1 in the NFL draft. So obviously, as an 18-year-old true freshman, if you're playing alongside 4 first-round NFL caliber wide receivers, you're not going to have a role. But the second that you have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave leaving Ohio State, you do have Marvin Harrison Jr. breaking out in 2022. He averages 97 receiving yards per game, which is good for about 32% of his team's receiving yards on a per game perspective, and averages over a touchdown per game as well, which is good for a 33% touchdown market share alongside another wide receiver that's going to go round 1. And then in 2023, yeah, obviously still have great wide receivers on this roster. Someone else that's going to go round 1 in this year's draft. You have Harrison with 100 receiving yards per game, which isn't much better than what you had as a true sophomore. But keep in mind, as a true sophomore, you had CJ Stroud. This past season, there was no CJ Stroud. So you went from 32% of your team's receiving yards on a per game basis up to 37%, a true dominant mark. Now, if we're going to look at the receiving touchdowns, this is where things get a little bit obnoxious. He averaged about 1.17 receiving touchdowns per game, which was good for about a 58% market share number with touchdowns, which sometimes every once in a while you'll see a wide receiver come out of a small school and yeah, they'll get close to 50% of a touchdown market share. But for a wide receiver to do that at Ohio State with other round 1 caliber talents on that same roster, it's unheard of. And that's why he is going to be a consensus top 5 NFL draft pick. He is going to be the number 1 wide receiver in drafts, the number 1 player in rookie drafts in 1 quarterback dynasty leagues. I mean, if we're going to go over and look at the community rankings on flockfantasy.com currently, you have the 101, 102, and 103, all anywhere from about 11 to 16 in the Dynasty Superflex rankings. So you're going to have Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in and immediately being in line with someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown with his Dynasty fantasy football value. Now let's go over to someone else that honestly may end up being a top 5 pick as well. Malik Nabers is a phenomenal prospect in his own right. Now you go back and as a true freshman, doesn't necessarily dominate, doesn't break out, has about a 14-15% market share number, but then breaks out as that true sophomore. Keep in mind, you have both Kayshon Boutte and Brian Thomas Jr. on this roster, 2 wide receivers that obviously will make it to the NFL. Brian Thomas Jr., someone we'll talk about a little bit later on. But nonetheless, you go to this final season at LSU, he averages almost 121 receiving yards per game. Now, obviously, this is one of the better offenses in the league. Yes, you have one of the better quarterbacks in the entire landscape coming into the NFL draft right now. Jaden Daniels should be a top 10 pick, but still, that's good for a 35% market share number as a true junior. So he checks a lot of these boxes. He breaks out as a true sophomore. He dominates as a true junior. He declares as a true junior, and he is going to be a top 10 pick in this year's NFL draft. If you're looking at where you should expect him to go in terms of an actual landing spot, let's pull up Tankathon here and we can try to speculate where you maybe see a decent landing spot for Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Nabers. I would be surprised if Marvin Harrison Jr. makes it past New England at 3, but maybe you could see Malik Nabers go to either Arizona at 4, Los Angeles at 5, the Giants at 6, Tennessee at 7. I mean, there are a lot of strong landing spots for him. Now let's go over to another wide receiver in his own tier in Rome Odunze. Yes, we're going to have 3 wide receivers in their own tiers. The reason being is I would be very confident in projecting this out by the time we get to rookie drafts in May, that this will be the order of these guys, of course, barring any landing spot changes. But nonetheless, this is a wide receiver that went through and played alongside 2 players that are going to go in this NFL draft at the wide receiver position. Played alongside Jalen Polk, who should be a day 2 pick, and Jalen McMillan, who should be a day 3 selection. Despite having that considerable amount of target competition, you still have a true freshman breakout with a 20% market share number with his receiving yards and a 34% market share number with touchdowns. Then beyond that, you go up to a 25% market share number as a true sophomore. And then as a true junior, you're going up to 110 receiving yards per game, which obviously this is one of the best passing offenses in college football. But still, I mean, you have a 31% market share number when it comes to yards and a 35% when it comes to touchdowns with quality target competition on your roster. If you're looking at mock draft database, they currently have him going as the 3rd wide receiver, about to pick 10 off the board. If you're looking at potential landing spots, potentially be looking at Denver at 12, the Jets at 10, Atlanta at 8, or maybe you're going down to Las Vegas at 13. Now, this is where things get a little bit shakier. I think that we could go back and forth with this tier. We're going to go Emeka Egbuka here, playing alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. Obviously, it was difficult for him to go out there and absolutely dominate. This past season was a down year. After his true sophomore season, a lot of people were having him as a top 3 wide receiver in this draft class. Obviously, the step down as a true junior is a little bit disappointing. But as that sophomore, he did have about a 30% market share number when it comes to receiving yards and an offense that had a healthy Marvin Harrison Jr. So this is a very similar situation to what we have seen throughout all of time, right? I mean, this is the Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. This is the Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, where if you're just looking at the raw numbers and not taking into account the actual competition you had for targets in that same offense, it is going to be very difficult to go out there and contextualize how impressive he actually was given that target competition. Now, Brian Thomas Jr. will be that same guy in that mold where you had to play next to Malik Nabers. Obviously, it's difficult to come out here and say that we know exactly what he is like. He did wait till his true junior season to break out, but he did have a 26% market share number with his receiving yards and a 38% market share number when it comes to his receiving touchdowns. So this is the tier where, like I said, we can end up swapping this back and forth, but I'm going to give Brian Thompson Jr. the benefit of the doubt here, considering the fact that he had to play with Malik Nabers, and right now he's currently being projected as about the 25th pick off the board, according to NFL Mock Draft Database. Now, going over what we have with our last player in this tier, we're going to go Troy Franklin. If you're looking at Franklin, doesn't have the same level of competition in comparison to some of these other guys. But with that being said, I mean, this is a wide receiver that did dominate in terms of the production this past season. You had over 100 receiving yards as well as over a receiving touchdown per game. Both were good for a 30% market share status. So it's a little bit difficult to comp his numbers directly to what we had with Egbuka, with what we had with Thomas. But, I mean, still, I think you can be impressed. And right now, he's being projected out to be an early 2nd round pick in the NFL draft. Now, something that I'm going to have to think about long and hard before we update our prospect rankings on flogfantasy.com. And yes, this week, we are going to be launching prospect rankings on flogfantasy.com, where everybody on the site will have their actual rookie rankings up to date for y'all, so you can see how Marvin Harrison Jr. comps to someone like Caleb Williams in Superflex, or maybe how you can see how Emeka Egbuka comps to some of the top running backs in this class. But if you wanted to check out any of that on flockfantasy.com, you know, we also have our trade calculator over there. You can also see how rookie picks are currently being valued. If you use code FLOCK, you're going to get 30% off any subscription. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team with that Mother Flocker tier. You can find that link in the description or the comment section. Now, going over to our next guy, Keon Coleman is a wide receiver that currently is at 18 in the NFL mock draft database system. But if I'm looking at this prospect profile, I'm not that impressed. I mean, this is a wide receiver that out of Michigan State as a true sophomore was good for 27% of his team's receiving yards on a per game basis. In this past season at Florida State, he was good for a 50% touchdown share. The issue is the receiving yards kind of fell off. He never eclipsed 30% of his receiving yards on a per game basis, but he did have to compete with Johnny Wilson, who's going to go day 2 of this year's NFL draft this past season. And 2 years ago, he had to compete with Jaden Reed, who obviously won the second round this past year and was great for the Green Bay Packers. Now, going over to our next two guys, we're going to go Adonai Mitchell as well as Xavier Worthy back to back. Obviously, I'm a Texas Longhorns fan, so it's going to be a little bit hard to remove my bias here. I want to put Xavier over Mitchell, but knowing how these two wide receivers operate, you're most likely, in my mind, going to have Worthy as a better NFL player, where Mitchell's the guy that you've seen with the red zone role. Mitchell is going to be operating a little bit close to the line of scrimmage, where Xavier Worthy is going to win with his speed. So if you're looking at NFL mock draft database, currently you have Mitchell at 32 overall with their projections. You have Worthy down at 41. I wouldn't be surprised if Xavier Worthy ends up going ahead of Mitchell in the NFL draft. But from a fantasy football perspective, Mitchell may actually be the guy that you'd prefer for your fantasy teams. I mean, Xavier Worthy kind of reminds me of Marvin Mims, where he did go out there and he absolutely dominated as a true freshman. He had 81 receiving yards per game, which was good for a 36% team market share number, which is legitimately absurd. And it had Xavier Worthy at the very top of wide receiver rankings back 2 years ago if you were playing in Devy. But he did trail off over the past 2 seasons at Texas, even if you include the fact that they did add in Mitchell, obviously giving more target competition. Now, Ladd McConkey will be our next wide receiver here. Playing at Georgia, I mean, obviously you had to go up against Brock Bowers, who is a considerable amount of competition. But still, nonetheless, this is a wide receiver that goes out and doesn't really do much. If you're looking at his market share numbers, he never eclipses 20%. So while I know a lot of people from an NFL draft perspective are excited about him and he projects out to be a second-round pick, I just want to talk about him and say, like, I don't necessarily see what's special. I mean, he stayed all 4 years in college and never eclipsed the market share number to break out. And then same thing with Xavier Legette. I mean, this is a wide receiver that also is being projected to go round 2 of the NFL draft currently. So I just feel like we have to talk about him a bit, but he did nothing in 2019, nothing in 2020, nothing in 2021, nothing in 2022. He did nothing for 4 years in his college career. And then at what, 22, 23 years old as a 5th-year senior, he goes out there and has a great season, which is cool, right? But historically speaking, what we have seen is if you're not able to do anything as a freshman or a sophomore in college, you're most likely not doing anything in the NFL, even if you can dominate some 18-year-olds by the time you're 22. But I think that's all I have for y'all with this video. I'm very sorry that this is probably not great. I am extremely sick, ladies and gentlemen. I'm trying to power through the best I can. But we will consistently be updating our prospect rankings over on flockfantasy.com. We're going to be diving deeper into this class through the course of the entire offseason. So, of course, make sure you subscribe. And if you want to keep up to date with all our updated rankings, with our trade calculators, with our trade values, with the whole 9 yards, find that on flockfantasy.com. Promo code FLOCK, get 30% off any subscription. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty Fantasy Football team in a podcast. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really do appreciate you. Really hope you have a great day and really hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.